Hey, this is Joe. How are you? This is not a vlog, by the way, but it's late at night. What time is it? It's 10:15 Mountain Daylight Time. No, Mountain Standard Time. 10:19. The time I'm recording this. PM, post meridian. Sun's gone that way. So late at night in the office. My wife is asleep or getting there, so I don't want to disturb her too much. But I wanted to show you something I've been working on, and so I try to put together a music system, a little simple stereo music system, old school, 2 speakers, right, left, right channel, 2 bookshelf speakers, something like a receiver. And if you think about what a receiver is, an old-fashioned stereo receiver, it has like 3 or 4 different functions. So first of all, it has an amplifier, and then you could say it has a preamp. And then it has switching, so you can switch various inputs. Then it has equalization. You can adjust at least bass and treble. And then it has a radio tuner. So I could have gone out and found, a used receiver from the 1970s or 80s or whatever. But I didn't want that kind of a size, the 19-inch wide, receiver, the big thing, and I wanted something a little more compact for my office here. So let me flip the camera around and I'll show you what I've been piecing together. So I had this little box. This is a Asian-made SMSL brand, Class F amplifier. It has, I think it's about 30 watts per channel. It has RCA inputs on the back, and it has speaker outputs on the back. There's a power switch and a volume control. There's a little blue light, which you can't see in black and white. So it's just a little box, and I've had that for a while. So it only takes 1 input, right? But this is the preamp amplifier section of my receiver system, okay? So the next thing I needed besides preamp and amplifier is I needed switching. And so this is a little 4-port audio-video switcher that I got off Amazon for under $30. And it has 4 inputs. It's just manual switches that you push like that. And I'm using 3 of the 4 inputs. One of them is a radio input. The other one's a tape deck input from this Sanyo tape deck. And the third one is my computer audio. So that's the switching ability that I need to make up a receiver. Then the next thing is equalization. Now, standard receivers have just bass and treble controls and like a loudness adjustment. This here is a Behringer, a mini FBQ, and this is does feedback monitoring. It has 4, 8, 9 channels of 9 frequency bands. It has a kind of loudness equalization. You can monitor both the input and the output level. It has a low frequency cut and its own volume control. It's a pretty nice little unit for, don't remember the exact price, but it's somewhere around $60 or $70 on Amazon, right? And then for my tuner capability, I had this old Grundig Globe Traveler AM/FM shortwave radio, and I'm using that as my tuner. So all told, this whole system here is about 9 inches wide and about 6 inches tall. And it's much smaller than a full-size receiver. And what I'm feeding it into is a set of Polk T15 bookshelf speakers. I have one situated right here, and the other one is up on my bookshelf on my other side of my office here. So I have a nice little system here, and the thing about it, though, is each one of this unit, and this unit all are powered by their own AC adapter. And, of course, the tape deck, the Sanyo metal tape deck, is powered by its AC adapter. So I have a 6-outlet plug strip behind here underneath this platform. And if you know anything about plug strips, you realize that you can't put AC adapters next to each other because they're too big. So I have these little I have a set of pigtail cords that enables you to expand out each of the outlets from the plug strip, so you can put each one into like an AC adapter into it or whatever. So I'm using 5 of them, and then the 6th one I use for putting camera battery chargers into or whatever. But that's my little system. This little wire rack is a kitchen wire kitchen pantry kind of wire rack holder. And then I have a piece of plywood on top of it to support everything. And so it makes up a system a lot smaller than a receiver, gives me more equalization and more inputs than a standard classic stereo receiver would. So I kind of like that. Well, so what else has been going on? Well, I have this old book that I purchased, and you might have seen this in one of the recent abacus videos, part 5 of the abacus. Anyway, the History of the Abacus by J.M. Pullen. It was, I believe, published around 1968. But anyway, there's a lot of historical stuff in here, especially about the European counting board style of abacus, which you might not be familiar with. But one of the things I kind of gleaned from this book, and also a little bit more research I've been doing, is some of the ways that the bead frame calculator was used in the old days. Now, my perspective on the abacus always came from having learned about the modern Japanese soroban, the 1-4 soroban, and how the Japanese made it highly efficient for use with decimal base 10 calculations. And that involves using what's called complementary arithmetic to do the calculations, which means simply that when you don't have enough beads on a row to complete the calculation, you subtract the complement and add the next higher bead in the next row up, that kind of thing, which is like basically borrowing, what we would call borrowing. Or regrouping is the other concept. But it kind of was interesting to me why the 2-5, the Chinese version of the abacus, why it still persists to this day. If there's a 1-4 more efficient version that the Japanese had perfected, and I initially thought maybe it had just to do with cultural traditions. The Chinese-based cultural tradition had always been using the 2-5 for such a long time. Maybe they just wanted to stick to it or whatever. But reading Pullen's book, I came across the idea that the way numbers are entered in the abacus wasn't always the way the Japanese entered numbers. Now, the Japanese do it in a very efficient way to maximize the speed or minimize the time for each calculation. Like, for instance, if you enter the number 8, you're going to do the 5 and the 3 at the same time, not with these fingers, but in the proper pinching motion with your index finger and thumb. Whereas on a more traditional culture, where speed wasn't the expedient issue, they would actually count it. You know, they would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, regroup, and 6, 7, 8. They would count out each bead, and what it means is that, just as the way I've done it now, I arrive at the same finishing number of 5 bead and 3 1 beads to make 8, but I don't actually do it as a single group. I do it individually. And what this means as far as calculations goes is you don't have to know anything about complementary arithmetic. You don't have to know anything. You only have to know how to count to 10 and how to regroup. And what I mean by regrouping is, if you get 5 beads on a rod, you take them away and put the 5 bead here. If you have 2 5 beads, you take them away and put a single bead on the next higher rod. That's all you have to know. Regrouping and how to count to 10. And you can do any of these calculations, addition and subtraction, without knowing any addition tables or complementary arithmetic or anything like that. So that was an interesting finding. So I'm going to be doing more of a full-featured abacus video on these findings, and it actually makes sense why these older forms of the abacus were continued to be used, and also the Asian abacus, which you might call the Russian abacus, the 10-bead abacus. Why didn't they go to 9 beads, right? Because you only need 0 through 9. Well, the reason why they stuck with 10 is because a lot of the ways the numbers were entered, it was counting. Counting, as I said, 7 plus 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 11, right? So it's easier to do the counting method of calculation when you have the full 10 or 15 digits being able to be reproduced or represented on each row. It just makes it easier that way. So anyway, that's a little finding that I had kind of discovered from my research in the abacus. And by the way, I have 2 other books on my bookshelf. that I need to start reading one of these days about the history of math and numbers and counting, and especially the abacus. So stay tuned for all that boring stuff. I like the black and white video, actually, and I have liked black and white video for a long time. The problem that I do have, though, is my facial complexion. I'm a desert rat. I've lived in the desert my whole life, and so you tend to see a lot of blemishes on the skin when you're using full spectrum light, because the shorter wavelengths of light penetrate your skin and they refract off of the blue-green capillary blood, and it shows blotches in the skin. And I've known this for a long time because of having known of something about portrait photography, black and white portrait photography back in the film era. And one of the ways that you made skin tones a lot more pleasing in black and white is use a red filter or an orange filter. You filter out the blue and green light, and the skin just pops smoother, all the blemishes disappear. And so I've been practicing, at least experimenting with this technique with a deep red, a 25A deep red filter over this digital camera. And when you do that, you lose about 70% of your light, because a neutral tone black and white is like 59% green, 30% red, and 11% blue. So you're cutting out the 70% green and blue, and you're only dealing with 30% red. So your ISO, your effective ISO of your camera drops down. So I have to bump the ISO up to, like, in this dim lighting with my artificial light here, I have to bump it up from ISO 400 I'm using now to maybe ISO 1600 or 3200 with a red filter. But I was doing some experiments with it earlier, and let me cut to that clip, and you can see the dramatic difference in my skin tone with a deep red filter. And let's cut to that now and see what you think. All right, now we're at ISO 3200. Same setup as before, Lumix G7 monochrome mode, high contrast, wide angle adapter, deep red filter. This is just an experiment in monochrome vlogging. Wide angle vlogging with a skin tone correction filter. What do you think about that? Does that look weird or not? I don't know. Okay, Joe out. Yeah, so what did you think, huh? See all this stuff here and the blemishes, you know, the mottled skin and all that? That's partly an artifact of full spectrum video. But you filter out everything but the red, man, that just gives me a totally different complexion. I guess I'm just vain. But probably won't be doing that in practice, because the shutter speed drops down to below a 30th of a second, so it gets almost kind of blurry looking video and jittery video, and you have to use a bright artificial light in the evening here, whereas unfiltered, it's not bad. So, well, so one of my recent equipment purchases, it was either this light or my monitor. I think it was the monitor. It came with a little flexible Gumby little tripod. What is this called? Digital Concepts, some off-brand or whatever. But anyways, it's a little handheld tabletop tripod, but if you put the legs of it together, it's kind of like a little grip. And so what's interesting about it, you take a little fairly small camera like this Lumix G5, and this is like 4 generations behind the G9. And anyways, you put this on this camera like this, right? Take the lens off here, and now all of a sudden you got a little camera grip. Isn't that weird? And yeah, the G series has the flippy screen, so let's turn that on, shall we? So what is this lens? This is the 20mm f1.7, and I have this camera kind of configured for as a street photography still camera. It will shoot video from the red button here, but it's really a street camera. Now it has the electronic viewfinder, and I have this thing set, I think, for back button autofocus. In the street photography mode, I would actually flip the screen closed so you can't see it, and use the electronic viewfinder only. See the eye sensor? So it becomes like a film camera, kind of like. But instead of holding it with the normal grip like I do, where I put my pinky underneath the bottom of the camera, because the camera is so small, instead of that, I could literally just kind of Go like that, you know. Just do a two-hand hold. You could even do, if you're doing verticals, you can just hold it like this, which is kind of cool, you know. But anyways, it's interesting. This little Gumby tripod is kind of cool, and I've also used it, oh yeah, with my Canon camcorder. Let's go grab that, shall we? So I have grab-and-go typewriter bags, two of them sitting down there. One of them has the Olympia SF, the other one has the blue Webster XL 747 Brother. But I put together this kit. This is a little used camera bag, and the shoulder strap for the camera bag, I just wrapped it up to make a handle. Just grab the bag, literally grab it and go. And what does the bag have inside of it? Well, let's see. If you unclasp the flap, the first thing you find in the bag is a UltraPod 2 with a Joby Gorilla Pod ball head attached, and I usually keep it at this angle because it fits in the camera bag. So this tripod just has two legs that fold out to make a cubical corner for a tabletop, but if you fold it up, it's a hand grip for the camera. And the camera is this lightweight little Canon camcorder that has the little Joby Gorilla Pod ball head mounting plate. And so now I can do selfie recordings like this with a flip out screen like that. And I keep the batteries in a separate pouch because it will drain the batteries if you keep them on the camera all the time. Open up the lens here. So there is the camera. So this Canon camera I've been using for quite a few of the vlogs, I should say, and but it doesn't have nearly as good of a light sensitivity as the Lumix, because this is a really small, tiny sensor. It's probably about the size of a cell phone, maybe, the sensor on it. But it has really good optical image stabilization, right? Optical image stabilization, which is accessed, powered image stabilization. Turn it on, and it's pretty darn good for vlogging, handheld, stable vlogging in bright light. It's not really good for this kind of light because this is too dim. But this is like a grab-and-go video kit that I can grab, just go somewhere. It has two batteries in the kit. It has a wall charger for the batteries if I need to charge that somewhere. And it has a cigarette lighter car adapter charger so I can charge camera batteries in the car. So this is sort of a self-contained mobile video kit. Like something's happening, you need to record it on video. You want to have a little bit better quality, certainly a better lens, focal length selection than what your cell phone has. You grab this kit and you just got to pop the battery into it. And so then I put the camera down in the bag and I put the tripod ball head hoopy-doop over the top of it, and then I just close the lid down and snap it shut. A grab-and-go camera video kit strictly for videoing. Well, another thing that's going on is 2018 ended, and my little coffee-themed calendar that I had here in the office is no longer valid and no longer useful. So I decided I would keep it, though, because the artwork, I could use it as a backdrop for like photographing close-up stuff. Like, for instance, when I photographed a couple of these abacuses just a while ago with my iPhone, I used it against the backdrop of that calendar. Let me show you those photos. So certainly the Asian appearance of the abacuses don't really match the Central American or African themed coffee paintings or artwork, but it is an interesting idea of using old calendar artwork as a backdrop for videos. And why am I moving the camera? I don't know. But it reminds me that it's probably there's probably some copyright infringement or something. Who knows? Does anybody really understand all that stuff? You know, the only thing people want, they just want you to give them the money. Just give them the money. There won't be any problems. It's sort of like what my folks used to call highway robbery. Did you ever hear that expression? Like if you go into a store and they ask way too much for something, you say, that's highway robbery. That was an old expression my folks had, especially my stepmom. Yeah, that's highway. They're asking way too much. That's highway robbery. That's all anybody wants. They just want you to give them your money. So that's all you have to do. Just give them your money. Everything will be okay. If you're a videographer, if you have been aware of the world of video technology, and especially cameras that do autofocus, the Micro Four Thirds, the Panasonic and Olympus Micro Four Thirds cameras have always used contrast detect autofocus, and it's always a problematic technology when the contrast of the scene is low and it doesn't know how to focus. So a lot of people complained about this, but it wasn't until the Lumix GH5 came on the market about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago or something. And all of a sudden, all these people that don't know anything about Lumix cameras, like I've owned Lumix cameras since the very first mirrorless camera, the G1, came out in 2008. Anyways, all these people that didn't know anything about Micro Four Thirds all of a sudden bought the GH5 because it was the latest and greatest video camera, and all of a sudden they discovered, dang, it doesn't autofocus as nice as we would like, you know. Because it's not phase detect autofocus. So anyways, some people resorted to manual focus lenses and whatever, but I found early on the best focusing accessory you can buy for these cameras is this. And this is the Panasonic DMW-RSL1. It's basically a remote control for the shutter. And it has a little 4-section connector that plugs into the remote jack on the side of your camera. And all these GH and G series cameras have these remote jacks. But when I'm over at the video table behind me shooting videos, you'll often notice my left hand reaches around and presses this, and this you can half press the button and it'll focus, right? And then you full press it and you take the shot, either start or stop the clip. Now, the only caveat to this remote control system, of course, is it's using the remote jack to simulate or emulate whatever your shutter button does up here. The problem is, like on this G5, these older G series cameras, the video mode would only be accessed through the red button, not through the shutter button. So the remote control for focusing, you couldn't actually use on this camera. You could use on the G7 and my GH3, which is my primary video camera. But anyways, for the newer G and GH Panasonic cameras, a remote control is the way you focus. You half press it anytime during the video and it will focus wherever the focus box is set. Like right now the focus box is right on this eye. I have it in autofocus mode, and if I put my hand over here, it'll eventually focus on my hand. As you can see, my face is now out of focus. My fingernails are in focus, and a good thing they're not too dirty. And then eventually the camera will take its time and focus back on my eye. But having the remote control on a kind of a studio setup, I can just sit there and hit this thing and control the focus as much as I want manually that way, or semi-automatically, I guess is the better way of putting it. No, this is not a solution for sports photography or something like that out in the field, but it's a really good studio solution if you're the cameraman as well as the talent in front of the camera. Talent is, you put in big quote marks. Tomorrow's Tuesday, and it's going to be a busy day. I have a dentist appointment in the morning. I have to call the Social Security office, and I have to go meet Cameron from First Draft Book Bar in Phoenix. He's here in Albuquerque. I'm going to meet him for coffee. And then I have a appointment in the afternoon, and then get to bed early and go to work tomorrow. So I don't know if I have time for any more videos this week. Darn it. I was actually hoping to make the abacus video this week, but I don't think that's going to happen. So you'll have to look forward to that boring video some other time. But in the meantime, this is Joe Van Cleve, and this is not a vlog.